Imagine you're trying to cook a meal with an ingredient from a different country, and it is a custom learning management LMS decided that they want to add a user account, a payment system, and even a In this video, we are going to cover what software complexity really is, the main thing that make the project complicated, and how to evaluate the complexity without getting overwhelmed, and some strategies to manage complexity so your project stays under control. Plus, I'll be sharing a real-life example from our own project at CoderFarm to show you how this concept plays out in real world. Let's jump right in. So, the introduction to project complexity. And the simple project turns into a complex one, the treehouse to mention. First off, what exactly is software complexity? Imagine you're working on a simple app where nothing too fancy, just a basic website with a few pages, and then client decided that they want to add a user account, a payment system, and even a chatbot. Suddenly this straightforward project become more complex one, and turning a small treehouse into a massive mansion with a secret room and windy staircases. The key factor contributing to software complexity. Now, let's talk about what make the project complex in the first place. Here are some main factors that can turn the simple project into something much more challenging. The project scope. The bigger the scope, the bigger the challenge. Think of the scope as your project to-do list. A short list, like building a page, is something manageable. But if the project suddenly needs to include an e-commerce platform, a CMS, and now the things are more tricky. At CoderFarm, we have seen this happen. When the client initially wanted a simple blog, but later they decided to add social media integration, an online store, and even a space for a virtual event. The broader, the more detailed the scope, the more complex the project becomes. Technology is stack, choosing the right tools. Imagine you're trying to cook a meal with an ingredient from a different country, and some from the future and some from the past. And that's what it's like when you choose a complicated tech stack. Suppose you're trying to create a project and now you want AI and blockchain into the mobile application. This is a cool idea, isn't it? But it adds the complexity. The more cutting edge technology, the more challenging it can be to manage. Team dynamics and managing different personalities and skill levels. Ever you try to organize a group trip? You have got a planner, you have got one who's always late, and the one who always brings snacks. Everyone has a role, but getting them to work together can be tough. Same goes for your project. At CoderFarm, we had a project once where we have to onboard with some seniors, and now suddenly we are managing communication, training, and different work styles. This all added the complexity, especially when we had a tight deadline, requirement, and dependencies. The external factor that add the complexity. Imagine you are building a Lego castle, but half of the pieces are with your neighbor and they only let you use once a month. Dependency, especially on external system or third-party tools, can make things much more complex. Let me give you an example. Let's say you're trying to build a project for a client, and the project heavily relied on this third-party application, and the API is frequently updated, and every time the API change, you have to adjust your code, which made the project more complex and time-consuming. Risk factor and managing the unpredictable element. Risks are like unexpected storms. They can mess up your plan in hurry, the tight deadline, the budget constraint, the scope creeps. When the project keeps growing, can all add the complexity. For instance, CoderFarm, we are working on a project where client want to integrate algorithmic recommendation system and into the existing platform. And however, the data required to train and the third-party providers this all keeps the delay and throw us timeline delay. And to mitigate the risk, we had the backup which involved a different data source, and we prepared a simplified version of this recommendation system to ensure that project stays on track. Evaluating the complexity, the tools and the technique. Alright, now that we know what makes the project complex and how do we actually figure out how complex it is without getting overwhelmed. And here are some simple techniques we used here also. The first one is work breakdown structure, WBS. Think WBS like planning a party. Instead of just saying, I need to plan a party, you break it down into a smaller task. Invitation, music, decoration, etc. The big task is less scary now. For example, we were trying to build an e-commerce platform. We break it down into design, is now more manageable and easy to track. Functional point analysis, FPA, measuring the size of your project. Functional point analysis is like outputs and other functions. Once we were building a project and it is a custom learning management, LMS, for a client. Each function like user registration, course creation, progress tracking got a point, and the more complex the project, helping us to better plan our resources. Complexity matrix, keeping track of your coding complexity. Metrics are like your project's vital sign. One example is cyclomatic complexity, which measures how many different paths there are through your code. The more paths, the more complex the code is. At CoderFarm, we use this matrix when we were reviewing our code base and identify the part that might be too complicated and need simplification. It's like counting the number of turns on a road trip. The more turn, the easier it is to get you lost. Prototyping and proof of concept. Testing before commitment. Before you dive into building something big, it's a good idea to taste the waters with a small prototype. Let's say you are creating a new feature that's never been done before, like a virtual meeting room. Instead of building the whole thing, you create a smaller version of it and see how it works. And once we were building a chatbot for a client and we try to do this exercise, and it helps us to know the challenge before committing fully to the development. Risk Assessment Matrix, planning for the unexpected. Think of a risk assessment matrix as a map of your project. It shows you where the dangers are and help you avoid them. You rate risk based on how likely they are going to happen and how bad the impact would be. For example, at CoderFarm, we use a risk assessment matrix on a project where we were integrating a new payment gateway. We identified the risks like the payment provider's API change, potential security, vulnerabilities, and downtime during the integration. By mapping out this risk, we were able to develop contingency plan that include backup payment gateway and additional security. We use risk metrics on a project where we were integrating a new payment gateway. We identify the risk like payment provider's API changes, potential securities, vulnerabilities, and downtime during the integration. By mapping out this risk, we were able to develop contingency plan that include backup payment gateway and additional security checks, and ensuring the project could continue smoothly even if something went wrong. Now, expert judgment, learning from experience. Sometimes you just need to ask an expert. It's like asking a seasoned traveler where to go on a vacation. They know the best spot and the pitfalls to avoid. Bringing in experienced developer or project manager to evaluate complexity can save you a lot of headache. For example, at CoderFarm, we often have a seniors even from multiple locations. They help us to manage this complexity and identify it early on. Their experience help us to avoid common pitfall and plan better. Strategies to manage complexity and keeping project under control. Evaluating complexity is just the start. The real challenge is managing it. And here is how you keep complexity in check and we do this at CoderFarm. The real challenge is managing it. Here is how we keep complexity at check at CoderFarm. Agile methodology, staying flexible. Agile is like your project's personal coach, keeping it flexible and focused by breaking the project into smaller pieces. You can regularly reassess and make changes as needed. At CoderFarm, we use Agile methodology on most of our projects, focusing on delivering working features every week. This approach helps us stay flexible and adapt to change without losing the sign-off end goal. Modular design, building in pieces. Modular design is like building with Lego blocks. Instead of creating one big piece of software, you break it into smaller independent modules that can be developed, tested, and maintained separately. For example, when we were building a large application, we divided it into modules like user management, payment process, content management. This made it easier to develop and to maintain each part without affecting the whole system. Continuous integration and continuous deployment. CI/CD, as you all know, can help to automate the process. CI/CD pipelines are like an automation assembly line for your project. The code is constantly being integrated, tested, and deployed without manual intervention. At CoderFarm, we use CI/CD pipelines for all the project and ensure that every time we make changes, it automatically tested and deployed. If it passes, this automation reduces the risk of error and keeping the project moving smoothly. Documentation and communication. Keeping everyone on the same page. Documentation is like a roadmap of your project. Without it, you are bound to get lost. Clear and concise documentation helps everyone on the team understand the project's goal, requirement, and how the code is structured. And don't forget the communication. Regularly check-ins, updates, and open channel for question can prevent a lot of misunderstanding. At CoderFarm, we prioritize both documentation and communication to ensure everyone is on the same page. Training and skill development. This is one of my favorite tasks. Empowering your team. A well-trained team is like a group of superheroes, each with their own strength, ready to tackle any challenge. Investing in your team's skill ensure they are equipped to handle project's complexity. At CoderFarm, we regularly provide trainings and workshops, especially when we are working on new technology. This not only improves our team's skill but boosts their confidence, and it helps us to handle the complex task and complex project. Now, the key takeaways. Managing and evaluating complexity of any software project doesn't have to be overwhelmed. While the right tool and technique, a bit of planning, you can turn even the most complex project into something very manageable. Remember, it's about breaking things down, staying flexible, and keeping communication open, just like we do at CoderFarm. Thanks for hanging out with me today. If you found this video helpful, or if you have got your own tips for handling project complexity, drop a comment below. And hey, don't forget to hit thumbs up, share this with your team, and subscribe to CoderFarm channel for more awesome content. Until next time, happy coding!